Welcome to session 3 of Switzerland India Language and Diversity Dialogues. In the last two sessions, we spoke to authors Max Lowe and Santa Purai, Rajika Roji Bolton, and Siddharth Sharma about language and identity. In this session, we will be speaking to Alexandre Amin and Shahnaz Bashir about their personal experiences, literary works, and journalistic reportage, navigating questions about belonging, memory, and identity. The diversity dialogues are jointly organized by Bashir, New Delhi, and Beyond. Bashir, New Delhi is part of the Swiss Arts Council's worldwide network of liaison offices. It supports and disseminates Swiss arts and culture in South Asia. It promotes cultural exchange, develops and nurtures long-term partnerships, initiates co-productions, and supports residencies. Belong is a platform to promote diversity and inclusion in India through the use of arts, literature, and community building. It runs the Belong Literature Festival, hosts regular book readings and events, and is also producing short format content focused on the themes of feminism, gender, sexuality, race, faith, and disability. Let me briefly introduce you to the two authors today. Alexandre Amin has worked as a national and regional journalist in Switzerland and has taught Italian in secondary schools since 2004. His debut novel, The Key in the Mill, won the Studer Gans Prize in 2017 and the Swiss Literature Prize in 2019. It has also been translated into German. Shahnaz Bashir is an award-winning Kashmiri novelist and academic. His books include The Half Mother, a novel which has been translated into French, and Scattered Souls, a short story collection which was longlisted for Tata Lit Live Award 2017 for Best Book Fiction. He is the South Asia juror for the True Story Award, the European equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize. Currently, he is a doctoral student and teaching associate in communication at University of Massachusetts Amherst. Also joining us is Manuela Leconte, who comes from south of Italy, but has been living and working in India since 2009. She has worked as Italian language trainer and translator earlier, and is now the brand ambassador for Indian companies distributing Italian luxury furniture in India. Manuela will be translating Alexandre. My name is Nawaid Anjum. I'm an independent cultural journalist based in New Delhi. I mostly write about books and authors and review books. Let me just begin the session with the sense of place, which is so vital to who we are and as writers, what we write about. The place we come from, the spaces we inhabit, they construct our identities in just so many ways. They provide a sense of belonging and foster attachments. They inform our experiences, and in fact, make us who we are. I want to go across to Alexandre and ask him, his memories of the place that he grew up in. It's a very beautiful place, in the Italian-speaking canton of Ticino called Lugano. And, his experience of life there, his, most fond memories of growing up there. Manuela, if you can just translate that. Alexandre.
Allora, partiremo parlando con il ruolo del luogo da cui proveniamo e gli spazi in cui viviamo, come questi forgiano la nostra identità. Quindi Nawaid vorrebbe sapere come il vivere nel Canton Ticino ti ha formato, che ruolo ha avuto questo luogo sulla tua infanzia e su quello che sei adesso.
Grazie, sì. Innanzitutto buongiorno a tutti e vorrei ringraziare per questo invito che mi è stato rivolto, quindi festival, ringrazio anche Manuela per la traduzione e tutti quelli che avranno la curiosità di ascoltarci. Per quanto riguarda il mio rapporto con i luoghi, forse la prima cosa importante che vorrei dire è che appunto io sono nato a Lugano e quindi la prima cosa che mi viene in mente quando penso a Lugano è che io non sono un migrante vero e proprio, pur avendo origini marocchine, perché mia madre è nata in Marocco, è rimasta incinta in Marocco ed è fuggita dal Marocco. Io sono però nato nella Svizzera italiana. Ma se penso alla mia infanzia, non è a Lugano che leggo questo momento della mia vita, ma a un piccolo paese del Malcantone. Dovete immaginarvi un paese montano, quindi in altura, è un villaggio molto piccolo, abitato da poche persone, con i luoghi proprio caratteristici del Canton Ticino e dei piccoli villaggi del Canton Ticino. Penso ad esempio alle piazze, alla chiesa, all'osteria di paese, ai sentieri, ai piccoli parchi. Ecco, la mia infanzia è maturata in questo spazio e la mia infanzia appunto è molto segnata da questi luoghi semplici, piccoli e fatti di rapporti con le persone molto stretti, il luogo in cui ci si conosce veramente tutti. Poi a 17 anni invece è iniziata una seconda fase della mia vita perché sono a quel punto sì tornato a vivere a Lugano con mia madre e quindi è una città, Lugano, con dimensioni non enormi ma certamente non paragonabili a quelle di un piccolo paese, no? E allora Lugano è forse il luogo in cui io sono maturato, no? Quindi il momento in cui ho formato la mia identità, il momento della maturazione è fortemente legato a Lugano, no? Quindi questi sono i due spazi più importanti. E poi il terzo spazio, che mi permetto anche qui di portare subito nella riflessione, è il Marocco. Quindi avendo origini marocchine, io ho trascorso a partire dai 10 anni diverse estati in Marocco e nel mio immaginario il Marocco è il luogo della mia famiglia, è il luogo delle vacanze, ma è ancora purtroppo il luogo nel quale io mi sento un po' straniero, perché non è il luogo nel quale sono cresciuto, non so l'arabo, non mi sento perfettamente a mio agio in quello spazio, benché io sia intimamente legato al Marocco per ragioni soprattutto familiari.
Ci sono diversi luoghi che hanno, there are different places that play a role in Alexander's definition of identity in terms of space. First of all, he doesn't consider himself as a migrant because he was born from a Moroccan mother in Switzerland. But he spent the most of his childhood in a small town in Canton Ticino, a small town where everybody knew everyone, where there were little spaces of encounter, where people were meeting on a daily basis. So it was a certain, there was a certain intimacy in this place. Which considered the place of his childhood, of his memories. Then he moved, when he was 17-year-old, he moved to Lugano with his mom. So Lugano represents the place where he grew up and he shaped his identity as an adult. So of course, these two places play a different important role in his life and in his writing. And thirdly, if you want to mention Morocco, Morocco is not the place where he was born or where he was going very often, but he was returning to Morocco every summer. So it was the place of holiday, it was a place of family. But unfortunately, he doesn't consider Morocco his home, since he feels a sort of foreigner in Morocco. He doesn't even speak Arabic, even if he looks like an Arabic person. So these three places intervene and shape his identity.
So this is what I meant, that no matter where you go up, no matter where you live, it's just the place per se, which just lies at the core of your identity and continues to shape you lifelong. That brings me to Shahnaz. Shahnaz, of course, grew up in a suburb of Srinagar. Natipura. It's a place that you also draw on for your first novel, The Half Mother. What are some of your abiding memories that you have of that place during your growing up years? And what have been some of your lifelong learnings from that place? And do you also see the place and the state of Kashmir as a determinant in the formulation of your identity and something which has shaped your sensibility and made you what you are as a writer and as a person?
Hi. First of all, the idea of home is highly troubled in the age we all live in, and so while Alexandre was speaking about interesting, at the same time strange, and also I mean in terms of where the home is located, and about the migrations, and then how it changes the discourse of understanding about what home is all about. So yeah, I was born here, and I grew up in Srinagar. I grew up in Natipura, as you mentioned. It's in local parlance, Naitpur.
Yes.
So the place is actually interesting in terms because it's a suburb. It's not more than 5 kilometers away from Lal Chowk, the center of the city, and it is, but at the same time, not the downtown per se.
Yeah.
It is a suburb that included, sparse, small holdings, houses, even small mohallas, or whatever you call small communes, old communes in which people who have been living in the place for a long time, for centuries together, generation after generation. So I also belong to one of those, those families who have been living here originally since, to me, time immemorial. Because if I look at 7 generations ahead of me, I cannot think of any other place that I think my ancestors have come from. But I know that they have come from other place, which is even holds a spiritual importance in history of Kashmir. It's called Charari Sharif, where we have shrine of one of the most prominent rishis of Kashmir, Sheikh Nurani. So, but this place is like, it had farms, and it had a lot of agriculture, not a lot of horticulture, but a lot of agriculture. And of course, my ancestors, they owned a lot of land. And I have memories of, playing in the orchards, in the farms, around these rice fields. I even have memories of small rills and small streams that would, pass through these rice fields. And, we would play in the childhood. We would make these paper boats and put them in those streams and see them, cruise, down. So all of that. And of course, then also, this is what I understood retrospectively, that, why, apart from books, one needs to be placed in a place where one gets a chance or an access to places which form an important source to your literature, to what you write or what you understand, how you understand the world. So you need to look elsewhere as well, and that elsewhere was the local baker shop, the local barber shop, at least these two. So I now retrospectively, value my growing up around these places, these shops, the shop fronts, listening and sometimes eavesdropping the conversation that was going on all the time among the elders, who discuss newspaper stories. Newspapers were always available at these saloons, and anybody, there would be some 5-6 customers waiting for their turns, and in the process they would read some news, and then the discussion in that superficial way at that level, because it was not a highly charged intellectual discussion on what was going on, but they would discuss. And then and in between, sometimes the discussion on the news, it would be intersected with family gossip, social stories, who is doing what, who died, who is ill, who is going to marry, all of that. And then how people understood that, what was the social understanding of all these things. So that one would not find in the books, especially Kashmiri literature does not have a lot of prose fiction, apart from a few. So, a lot of poetry, of course, but not a lot of prose fiction. So that was how I grew up in an atmosphere where I had these earthly smells and an experience of what it means to struggle, what it means to live, apart from belonging to a family that had a lot of land. But apart from that, it was not even something that was privileged or elite, in terms of the society, social, understanding. So this is what informed my upbringing as well as my literature later on.
Right. It's pretty much evident in the stories that you have written, and as well as Alexandre, there's that bit about that moving around, and a lot of us in the modern world have lived that kind of life of constantly being on the move, of constantly being on the move. Like, we have our suitcases packed most of the time. We have like one foot in one place and the other in another place. So I wanted to know from you, what did this constant moving around do to you? As someone who was growing up, and to your sense of home.
Spostarsi continuamente tra luoghi differenti, avere sempre una valigia a casa pronta per partire, avere un piede in un luogo e l'altro nel luogo successivo, come questo continuo transitare tra luoghi diversi ti ha formato, come ha influito sempre sulla creazione del tuo concetto di spazio, di casa, di appartenenza.
Io in realtà non ho transitato tantissimo nella mia vita, sono piuttosto sedentario e anche un po' pigro. Sono cresciuto in questo villaggio del Malcantone e le trasferte che ho fatto sono soprattutto legate all'estate, come dicevo prima, in Marocco. Però al di fuori di questi viaggi estivi ho vissuto la gran parte della mia vita in Ticino. E già semplicemente il fatto di andare in altre parti della Svizzera mi fa sentire la diversità rispetto ai luoghi. La Svizzera è piccola, però è, come dire, è un microcosmo di spazi, di culture, di lingue, di religioni, no? E per un ticinese anche semplicemente superare i confini cantonali significa entrare in una dimensione altra, no? Quindi noi dal Ticino abbiamo uno sguardo soprattutto verso l'Italia, se pensiamo alla cultura, no? Alla cultura italiana alla quale siamo molto vicini, e quindi quando penso così agli spostamenti li penso più verso sud, cioè verso l'Italia, che non verso il nord, cioè verso il resto della Svizzera. Mentre il Marocco è proprio l'altrove, ciò che nella mia mente è ancora lontano, no? Serve l'aereo per andare in Marocco, no? Quindi anche nel mio immaginario si è formata questa immagine di uno spazio davvero lontano da me, anche se legato alla mia famiglia. Io ho studiato in Italia, no? Quindi sono molto legato all'Italia, sono un grande tifoso dell'Inter, quindi la squadra di calcio di Milano. Quando posto vado spesso a Milano, adoro la Toscana, cioè il mio transitare va soprattutto in quella direzione. E sulla mia identità È indubbio che questo ha inciso molto. Non è un caso se io oggi purtroppo non sono in grado di dialogare con voi in inglese e sarei comunque anche in grande difficoltà se lo dovessi fare in francese o in tedesco, perché la mia identità è fortemente italiana, nel senso non solo linguistico ma anche culturale, proprio perché sono radicato in questo luogo. Un po' me ne dispiaccio perché in fondo così sono molto limitato nel mio comunicare. Dall'altro è stata forse anche una strategia di difesa, perché forse solo così sono riuscito a costruirmi le mie piccole certezze identitarie.
Non ho mai, I never moved around so much between places, to be honest. I spend the majority of my time in Ticino and in Lugano, and also in this small town in Switzerland. So I cannot consider myself someone who really like to move around with a foot on a place and the other foot in another place. But I consider myself a bit lazy, to be honest. So when I think about moving around, I can say that for me, another important place to visit is Switzerland per se, because since I'm part of Canton Ticino, even if I move to another place in Switzerland, seems to go abroad because people change, culture change, language change. So I feel that my exposure to travel has been restricted to Switzerland and then to Morocco, but Morocco only during summer holiday. So I was there only for a very short period of time with my mom, with my family, but I never felt completely there. When I think about traveling and getting enriched by the action of traveling, I feel that Italy play a very big role, especially south of Italy, especially Tuscany, that I visited many times. I am a big supporter of Inter as a football team, so I went many times. So I visited this city with joy many times, and the same fact that I studied in Italy, I speak in Italy, it means that I shaped my whole persona in Italy. It's a pity for me to not be able to communicate with all of you in English, or I cannot even speak German or French. This means that I feel deep inside Italian because Italian play a big role in who I am because of study, languages, and I feel that who I am today is because of this, moving around this country, Switzerland, Morocco a bit, and Italy as main influencer.
Okay, great. Great. We'll come to some of the related questions to this later. But when it comes to the construction of self and the construction of identities, Shahnaz, I want to bring in Freud, who was one of the foremost thinkers of the 20th century, who sort of had a deep influence on the way we perceive ourselves, the creation of the self. This whole legacy of the subconscious mind and what we call the subconscious self. That what goes on in our mind is basically an interplay of several subterranean forces. What do you think is his legacy in terms of and how is it linked to the way we think of ourselves and the way we create literature?
It's a very interesting question. Let's trouble Freud a little, on this, on the notion of unconscious self, by which he meant, I think, a set of essentials, in terms of desires, urges, thoughts, ideas, and beliefs. So, but if we look at literature directly from a Freudian lens, we will be very reductive in terms of reducing the literature to only psychological, which it is not necessarily always. So because self as such, as I have come to understand it, is I think in four parts. Like, you have an emotional self, you have, apart from essentially who we are, I mean, there is also a debate on essentialism of identity of the self. Like, there is a debate, there is a notion that, if all the objects, all, suppose human beings, they have an identity, they have certain essential attributes, necessary attributes, characteristics attached to them, without which they are not what they are. Or they might, in terms, the non-essentialism would say that, no, that's not the case, because cultures, as Alexandre was talking about, and human realities, day-to-day realities, every day everybody changes. So the knowledge of the self also changes. So it's very tricky. But I would locate it in between the two, where the self is essentially something attached to some sort of ethnicity, maybe language, love for the way of life one has lived in a place where he was born, or he or she was raised, or where you married, or where you were educated, or where you worked, whatever. So all of these layers, they pile up on you, and they make a collective self of yourself, which is then comes essentially apart from all these layers, we have an emotional self, we have a material self, that is our body. We have also a spiritual self. Some people would not agree, maybe meditative self. And also we have a rational self, cognition. So actually, Freud is clubbing two things in this set of observations, like urges. So if we separate urges, feelings, vibes, and desires apart from the beliefs and ideas and thoughts, so you need to have something to inform that. Where do those, for example, any human being would have common feelings of anger, desire, love for things, like if somebody, for example, pain, if we are pained, whatever form of pain we get, if we are pained, and it invokes a certain emotional response to that, which is common to all human beings on this earth. But what is the source of that pain? What is the epistemological foundation of that pain? Where does it come from? A certain truth that we believe in, that something is causing pain which should not do that. So likewise, thoughts are like, amorphous, things in our minds, and we don't know what they actually absolutely are unless they come out in the form of sound, or in the form of writing, whatever. So dividing these two separately, but all of these have something that informs them. Whether we would say that the emotional self works on the intuitive and instinctual responses. How that happens, that is again a question that even philosophers like Kant and other people debated, and that the debate is still open. However, they spoke on it, they worked on it. So now coming to the literature, I think psychological self, the emotional self, is very important. It plays a role, but unless there is an episteme of embodied lived experience that causes certain psychological, stimulation, which has to come out on the paper in the form of a poem or a book or a short story. For example, if we categorize literature, so some towering literary figures in the world who have, for example, if we take Dostoevsky, highly psychological in terms of, but not merely psychological, informed with a lot of philosophy, lot of theology, even the way he ordeals morality in his literature. Or, for example, we have Kafka to an extent, but that is not merely psychological. There has to be some historical, because I think there are three main ingredients that comes, to form whatever, stories we write. One is the memory that we have, that we believe in, which is very personal, which is very private, which is very individual also, many times more than history. But both inform your literature, history as well as memory. And the presence of observation, what we are observing now, or what the memory of the consciousness of that fact that we have observed in the past, and we are recalling retrospectively and semantically trying to test it, what it was actually. Was it the same, the way we understood it in the past? That is why, most of us, many writers are nostalgic. They want to bring that into their writings. So we have observation, which is informed with a lot of consciousness of the present or the memory of the past, and also, which I would, maybe, elaborate later in terms of what literature is trying to tend to be now, but is not let to be because of certain reasons, certain political reasons in the publication and literary worlds, in the corporate publishers worlds. So otherwise, there is something that, what does it all mean? The semantics of it. So reducing literature merely to psychological will be a reductive approach towards literature. But of course, without looking at the episteme that informs the literature through emotional self, will be an injustice to literature.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shahnaz. I think that gives us a perspective on the role of psychology and its interplay with literature. And let me go across to Alexandre on a few things related to to what he was saying about his memory of Morocco, some vacations there, and his how Italian culture and language sort of lies at the very core of his artistic as well as academic endeavors. I want to bring in language here because another part of our identity has to do with language. It's very, very intrinsic to the expression of culture. Alexandre, if you could tell us about your approach to Italian and the influences of Italian culture, because it's a very rich culture, and the culture of Switzerland itself, because it's informed by so many cultures, so many languages, so many ways of living, so many ways of seeing. I want to ask you, Alexandre, that your understanding, your engagement with the Italian culture and language, especially because that's a language that you have been teaching for over a decade and a half now. So if you could give us a sense of your engagement with Italian culture and language, which is another form of our identity.
Stiamo parlando del ruolo appunto della lingua nella formazione dell'identità, e risulta molto interessante per tutti noi capire qual è stata l'influenza della lingua italiana sulla creazione della tua identità, non solo sul risultato che può essere identificato appunto dalle tue opere letterarie, piuttosto proprio su come ti consideri nel tuo rapporto con la lingua italiana. È molto interessante sapere che hai insegnato lingua proprio per più di 10 anni, quindi vorremmo un po' sapere come questa esperienza di insegnamento linguistico possa aver contribuito a formare quello che sei adesso, quello che hai prodotto proprio a livello letterario?
Sì, io appunto sono cresciuto in un paese nel quale si parlano almeno teoricamente 4 lingue, no? Italiano, francese, tedesco e romancio. Poi se andiamo a vedere, la realtà è che pochissimi svizzeri davvero parlano queste 4 lingue, soprattutto il romancio è conosciuto da pochi. Però questo ha delle conseguenze, nel senso che io sono cresciuto in un contesto dialettale, quindi i primi anni della mia vita sono fortemente segnati dall'uso del dialetto, no? E il mio incontro con l'italiano va fatto risalire soprattutto alle scuole, no? Quindi quando ho iniziato il mio percorso scolastico ho iniziato a studiare l'italiano come sistema linguistico e da lì poi fino a farne una passione così divorante da trasformarsi nella professione che tuttora svolgo. Però lungo questo percorso io ho avuto un rapporto piuttosto difficile e complicato, come forse si è già intuito con le lingue, no? Al di là dell'italiano, perché ho studiato francese e tedesco, ma tuttora non posso dire di padroneggiare queste 2 lingue, soprattutto il tedesco. No, le ho studiate a livello di scuola elementare, media e liceale, ma poi non praticandole regolarmente le ho un po' perse per strada. Invece non ho mai perso per strada l'italiano, ho perso per strada semmai anche il dialetto, no? Che parlandolo sempre meno, poi è un po' evaporato, ma anche se insomma penso di essere comunque in grado di parlarlo, di capirlo senz'altro, ma l'unica lingua che davvero ha accompagnato tutta la mia vita è l'italiano. No? E questo elemento biografico poi si è sommato alla passione che è sbocciata anche per la letteratura italiana, no? Che io faccio risalire più o meno a metà del mio percorso liceale. No? Nel momento in cui su questa solida base linguistica italiana si è aggiunto anche l'amore per la letteratura italiana, ecco che il mio percorso era più o meno segnato. No? E questo percorso di insegnante mi ha, come dire, mi ha rinfrancato nella scelta che ho fatto. Sono molto contento del lavoro che svolgo perché mi mette a contatto con delle cose meravigliose, che è quello che ci ha consegnato il patrimonio letterario italiano, anche se, come dire, rispetto a un italiano, tu Manuela sei italiana, forse di origine, almeno ne sai forse più di me su questo, la particolarità di noi della Svizzera italiana è che noi studiamo la letteratura italiana, cioè dell'Italia, non la letteratura della Svizzera italiana, no? È una cosa che non tutti sanno, no? Cioè, per un italiano studiare letteratura italiana significa studiare fondamentalmente le radici della propria identità. L'italianità si è formata anche e soprattutto direi attraverso la letteratura, no? Gli svizzeri italiani invece non si formano sulla letteratura svizzera, no? Ma guardano a sud, verso la letteratura italiana. Per cui abbiamo uno sguardo un po' obliquo. Da un lato guardiamo la letteratura italiana nella quale ci riconosciamo come sistema culturale, ma non ci possiamo identificare al 100% perché non siamo italiani, siamo della Svizzera italiana. E dall'altra abbiamo uno sguardo naturalmente attento anche alla letteratura svizzera, che però è altra cosa, no? Quindi la letteratura della Svizzera tedesca forse guarda alla Germania, quella della Svizzera francese guarda alla Francia e noi guardiamo all'Italia. Ma forse la conoscenza reciproca, no, della letteratura svizzera non è fortissima, quindi solo forse le persone molto appassionate di letteratura conoscono bene, no, gli scrittori delle altre aree linguistiche. No? Io ho letto certamente gli scrittori della Svizzera tedesca e francese più importanti, però non posso dirmi un esperto, no, di letteratura della Svizzera tedesca. Quindi in questo senso, se ancora ci ricolleghiamo al discorso sull'identità, per me sia la lingua sia la letteratura italiana sono forse l'unica, mi verrebbe da dire, certezza.
He grew up in a place where 4 languages were spoken, so like Italian, English, French, and Romancio. Romancio is a language that not many people are aware of. But he was studying all these languages at school. He was not mastering them. The only language that he was really familiar with at the time was the dialect of the place he was living in. And then sadly now that some time has passed, this dialect is not so strong in him anymore. So the language I really identify with is Italian. He started learning Italian when he went to high school. So his knowledge started growing, but at the same time at school, he was learning other languages as well. So he was learning English, French, but his real passion was for Italian language. So from that time onwards, from the high school onwards, he really developed a real love for Italian. And this love got rooted when he could also study Italian literature. So language plus literature made him clear what he wanted to be. So his profession really represents his love for Italy, for Italian culture, for Italian language. Sadly, the Italian literature that was taught was only literature produced by Italian author in Italy. So something was missing because he considered himself an Italian living in Switzerland. So there was not any window on Italian literature produced by Swiss author. So whenever he was studying or whenever he could refer to Italian literature, he had to just consider literature produced by author writing in Italian belonging to Italy as a country. So of course, he started studying about other authors of Switzerland, writing in Italian and also in other languages. But what really forged his identity was like Italian literature produced by Italian author plus Italian language and the love he feel for this beautiful language.
Thank you, Manuela. It's indeed a beautiful language. So many Indians are learning, and so many people across the globe are learning that. So, and I believe it's one of the most learned languages in the world today. So, talking of languages, Shahnaz, it brings me to Kashmir, where you have at least 4 languages being spoken. I mean, there's Kashmiri. People speak English also, Urdu, and I don't know how much of Hindi is spoken there, but certainly a mix of Urdu and what we call Hindustani. The question to you, Shahnaz, is the language. What kind of language is the preferred language in schools today in Kashmir? And also, some of the best literature that we have read on Kashmir happens to be, and maybe it is a language bias that we have, since we are reading and writing in English. We tend to be a little biased to English, of course. So my question is that your decision to write in English, what triggered that decision? Also, writing in one's own language and writing in English, for example, how does that sort of, does that really kind of represent the aspirations, the condition, or the anxieties of Kashmiris? And do you think that an average Kashmiri would identify with the narrative written in English and not so much with written in their own language?
Yeah, okay. With languages, I think in my generation, we were not taught Kashmiri language in the schools, which should have been a norm. But because there were maybe, I don't know what reasons, so we were taught the courses were in English language, but the medium of instruction was Urdu. Many people might think, who did not, happen to live in urban spaces, think that it was a sort of being underprivileged, that they could not read English. But it's very funny and very strange at the same time, and also intriguing, that because we were not familiar with English, the language that my father's generation or his father's generation studied or read in. My grandfather was not, he was a semi-educated person, but my father studied in Urdu, but he knew Kashmiri also. Kashmiri was also taught in terms of script, as well as, and it was spoken. There was no Urdu was introduced only in terms of later, when a lot of religious literature would, for example, the translation of Quran and the biography of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of that came in translations in Urdu. And then we had Urdu newspapers here, and of course there were revenue records were written in Urdu, but there was Persian before Urdu was there. So my generation did not study Kashmiri. We spoke Kashmiri in our homes, with our friends, in the society. We were taught in Urdu medium, but the courses were in English. So because the teachers themselves did not have any, sound background in English language as such, because they also came from schools which had the same, thing going on. So basically, when you are not trained to write in a language that is your mother tongue, but you understand and you speak it, like, you find it very close to your heart, because you know that it is the language, it is the medium in which you can express yourself much more than you could do in other languages. So and then it's a pain, because you feel the handicap, because you want to document it somewhere and you cannot. So it feels like a handicap. So it was, I think, around, in school, where somehow I am, many times I try to think that what triggered, actually, why was I maybe, in a group of 30 people, always a student. I was very stupid and dumb, in my school, maybe up to 8th standard. I wouldn't speak a lot, but I was very sharp observer of things. At the same time, the only thing that I would respond very quickly and very, stringently in the class was word meaning sentences, because I had somehow this sense of, crafting a sentence that would make either people laugh, or they would think that where did all these words in the syntax come from, and what is he thinking? So they started judging me also. But I was conscious of this, that I can write sentences, so I can bring these words brick by brick, and I think somehow later on, somehow I thought that I could write and express myself, but it was English, because that was the language I worked on individually myself. So we did not have before, in 90s, we did not have this Google, and we did not have computer. We had maybe in 98 or 99, we had these cafes, cyber cafes. So I would not be able to find words which were there in Kashmiri. I would not be able to find their translation in English in the English dictionary, because they were Kashmiri nouns and Kashmiri verbs sometimes. So I would spend hours together in bookshops, because one would not be able at that point of time to own many dictionaries, and purchase books. But I would spend a lot of time irritating booksellers and try to find meanings of the words, but not all. So when Google came, so I would go and I would put some word in Google Images and start searching it. Like, for example, we have these collards in Kashmir. Even I think maybe 10 years ago, I did not know what it was called in English. And now I know that it is, even, cultivated in the US and elsewhere also. So we have collard greens and all, but there were some words which were untranslatable because they were specifically Kashmiri nouns, like we have this kangar or we have ferran. So I had to struggle a lot. And now the question, which is an important question, is that the matter of articulation. Obviously, I think one will not be able to articulate oneself better than his or her native or mother tongue. That is, even if one does not know to write it, how to write it. So, but the handicap, it's like, for example, if we are sometimes physically challenged as human beings, so the other sense becomes sharper because we try to, channelize that energy that was supposed to, work through a particular sense that we do not have. So it takes some other form. It sharpens, some other sense more than it does in normal people. So I think the same way it happened that the handicap of not being able to write in Kashmiri compelled me to, move more and more close to English language, because I found it the only way and mean of, expressing myself. And of course, to this day, I still do not know a lot of words, do not know a lot of vocabulary, because for us, it's a challenging task. When I see these, my colleagues in the US who come from Brazil, who come from Russia, who come from China, and we discuss these, people that we read, for example, some philosophers and other, theorists. So they say, oh, we already did it. When? In Brazil, in Portuguese, in Chinese, in Mandarin. And they ask, and you? I said, it's not in Kashmiri. So we have this double challenge. First of all, it's like we have to read and translate it in our minds, into Kashmiri and then understand it. It's like a multi-layered process for us. So that is the challenge. So I think it's like, but as such, one thing that is common to all writers is that because language is nothing without semantics, we have to be, careful about that. And what, Derrida was, beautifully, though it's very challenging and very, very difficult to understand this notion of difference, that he said that language in our minds is, before it is sound, it is a thought. Before it is thought, it is something amorphous we don't know. And this there is a pre-language to any language in everybody's mind, and that pre-language sort of differs the meaning before it is actually changed or transformed into a language, whether in the written form or in the spoken form. So then it no longer, he called it difference. So same goes with everyone. The only thing is that we need these tools. And I think that even the writers who write in their native tongue would also say that even sometimes they also are challenged with overdetermination, that they want to say something, but they are not even able to say it in their own native mother tongue, because it is something very, very, very complex, very complicated. And Kafka, I remember, nicely, and today is coincidentally his birthday. So he said that I write different than I write different than what I think, and I think different than what I speak, and I speak different than what I write different than what I speak different than what I think, and I think different than what I should think. And what I should think is different from all wherever from that thinking is coming, that changes into language and an expression.
Okay, let's, Manuela, just the gist of it, if you could translate to Alexandre, and then we could move on to other questions. We are into 1 hour, and I think we have to wrap up quickly, so I should just move ahead with other questions. If you could just quickly translate this bit to Alexandre so that he has a sense of what we're talking about.
La cosa più interessante che è stata discussa sono le limitazioni che ogni persona deve affrontare quando pensa un concetto, lo dice a parole o lo mette in maniera scritta su una pagina. Quindi c'è sempre una sorta di traduzione del pensiero in lingua o in scrittura, ed a volte anche degli autori famosi come Derrida o come Kafka hanno messo in evidenza proprio questo concetto di questo scarto che c'è proprio tra il pensiero, che è una sorta di prelinguaggio, la lingua e poi la lingua scritta. Quindi Shahnaz parlava anche delle difficoltà che lui ha affrontato con il Kashmiri, perché non è una lingua che ha studiato a scuola, ma è una lingua che parlava solo nell'intimità domestica. Quindi quando è cresciuto e si è trovato a voler esprimere dei concetti complessi nella propria lingua, si è accorto che in realtà non era una lingua in cui poteva scrivere. Quindi ogni volta che volevo utilizzare il Kashmiri anziché l'Urdu, che era il mezzo di istruzione a scuola, per parlare della letteratura inglese, si trovava in grossa difficoltà dovendo fare delle traduzioni, vari livelli di traduzione nella sua testa.
Beh, sono riflessioni molto, molto profonde e molto interessanti queste. Io confesso di sentirmi un po' inadeguato rispetto a questo discorso perché, come si è capito, ho dei grossi limiti linguistici. Naturalmente capisco bene il discorso per il quale la lingua ha dei limiti e non riesce quasi mai a essere trasposizione fedele di un messaggio. Però riesco anche a immaginare l'esatto opposto, cioè il fatto che a volte la lingua dice di più di quello che noi abbiamo dentro la testa. E questo capita molto spesso con la poesia, no? La poesia penso che abbia questa forza, cioè di potenziare a volte attraverso proprio dei meccanismi linguistici, ritmici, fonici, di musicalità, un pensiero che magari è solo razionale e diventa qualcosa di diverso e di molto più potente, no? E a me affascina questo, soprattutto del linguaggio poetico. No? Sul resto confesso di essere un po' in difficoltà perché avendo un bagaglio linguistico molto limitato, ho sperimentato questo discorso sul passaggio da una lingua all'altra e su quanto si può perdere o guadagnare solo discutendo con la mia traduttrice, no? Che ha lavorato nel passaggio dall'italiano al tedesco e questo è stato molto interessante, ma per me come scrittore, soprattutto nella misura in cui mi sono reso conto di come anche semplicemente lo scarto culturale che può esserci rispetto al traduttore può porre dei problemi, no? Anche semplicemente di comprensione del testo, oppure anche semplicemente delle parti non scritte benissimo, nei confronti delle quali il traduttore ha un occhio molto più attento, no? Quindi il traduttore ti inchioda le tue scelte e tu devi riuscire a spiegare qual è l'immagine che volevi rendere, no? Con quella parola che magari in tedesco non esiste o ha una sfumatura diversa.
He's saying that is very interesting what Shahnaz said about, this passage that there is between what you think, what you say in words, what you write, which language you use to say something that is in your mind. You cannot really say much about, dealing with different languages because he didn't master so many languages, and he chose like Italian as language of expression, but he understands the difficulty of this transposition, of this translation between thinking and saying it and writing it. This is what happens sometimes also when you trust and you put your words in the end of a translator, because translator can add something to what you want to say, can be more precise of what you want to say, or can remove important part of your thoughts, of your words. So there is always an addition of your message or a lack, something missing in it. So depends on the situation, but you can say that for him poetry is an expression of literature where language ends up saying more than your logic thoughts, because he work on a different level. He play on emotion a lot, he play on rhythm. So language is way richer in poetry, and your message become amplified.
Right, thank you, Manuela. So, there's a question to both Shahnaz and Alexandre related to this question of the self. That when it comes to to the creation of the self and identity, writers would say that that their words or what they write about is basically constitutes their identity too. That in some way, what they write is a reflection of who they are or what they are. I want to ask them that can these identities be reinvented through the act of writing? So maybe Shahnaz can answer, and then Alexandre, or either way.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure, Shahnaz, I was saying that when it comes to the creation of the self, the writers would argue that it's all in the writing. That what they write about is who they are. That their writing constitutes the core of their real self. I want to ask that and for long you have this nation and borders constituting identity and defining identities in some ways. But many writers who are sort of shuttling between cultures, moving from one nationality to another, could in the times we live in, could be sort of redefine and reinvent identity through writing, through the act of writing.
I think it is as difficult to express that in literature as it is as interesting it is to live all those lives. For example, people who have been writing, who have been giving us a lot of diaspora view of things, back home that they called home once upon a time, or maybe belonging, fundamental, existence and all. It's very difficult. It's a challenging task because to understand, to know both cultures well, the culture that you come from and the culture to this trans-cultural navigation in literature is also sometimes dangerous for people, unless there are two different ways of looking at it. One is that you are a diaspora, you are living somewhere else, dislocated from what you called home, and you are writing essentially about home, not about the place where you're situated now, always. People in exile, who have been in exile, they have written about home, all of the stories. For example, we have this Libyan writer now, Hisham. He has lived in many places in Europe, maybe in UK, but always about Libya. Even the memory, his memoir, that won Pulitzer, it's about his father in Libya. So how he returned to Libya to locate, to the memories, all of that. So that is relatively a safe approach, because you're talking about something that you already know or you come from and you know very well. You have embodied, not only because, our information as writers might come from, one is the lived experience, what we have embodied, and we perform that in literature. One is knowing the world as text, that what we have read about a place, or not knowing a place fully. That is why I really love, for example, Jhumpa Lahiri we talk about. I loved her collection of short stories, Interpreter of Melodies, which were stories essentially about Bengalis, and even Bengalis who came to US and started living there and were traveling. But I have a really, I have a problem with her book, however overrated that is, Lowland, because of the factual inaccuracies from the subject that she is really trying to explain and describe, but without having a lived, fully, embodied experience of the place. And if you rely only on what certain things and people tell you, that if you want to understand this problem back home, read this, unless you have really experienced it. What we were talking about earlier, we were talking about unconscious self that has gone into us, and then it spills out sometimes. So then you have a very polarized understanding of things, what it is to be, for example, in her book Lowland, I come from Kashmir, so I know about the place, even if I have not been, I was not born in that, in the time of which she talks in her novel. Though she does not belong to Kashmir, I have not lived, I even do not know much about, but whatever all the Kashmiris know and whatever the history says is, like, for example, her, one incident she mentions about, there is this, she says there was a riot between Hindus and Muslims because of this holy relic was stolen from the shrine of Hazrat Balher, which is absolutely false, because there was a political problem behind it, and everybody knows. I mean, anybody can speak on that. And likewise, there are other factual inaccuracies in the book that I have pointed out to many people already who have criticized literature and who have appreciated. So it's really difficult to talk about a place that you have not. Yeah, if you have known a certain place to a certain age, a certain time, you talk about it. I'm not an authority, and this is not authoritatively I'm saying, and I'm laying down a theory, that, one should not write about a place one does not belong to or one does not live. But it is like, it's a technical problem. You cannot, unless you have embodied those emotions, because if you know world indirectly, even if that world belongs to you, it will be a dangerous position to take.
Mm-hmm. Let's hear what Alexandre has to say on this.
Gli scrittori spesso dicono che loro sono ciò che producono, ciò che scrivono, ciò che mettono in parola, carta su penna. Tu credi che l'identità degli scrittori corrisponda a quella che mostrino nei loro, nei loro testi, o che vogliano persuadere se stessi e poi gli stessi lettori di qualcosa, cioè di come loro si sentono, di come loro siano attraverso le loro pagine? Cioè, credi che ci sia uno scarto tra l'identità vera e propria di uno scrittore e quella che loro credono di avere, o che corrispondano poi su quella che viene fatta emergere?
Domanda difficile. Anche perché mette insieme due cose molto complicate da trattare. In generale già il tema dell'identità è complesso, innanzitutto perché da un lato abbiamo la sensazione che tutto quello che ci succede, tutto quello che ci riguarda, in un modo o nell'altro abbia a che fare con l'identità. Abbiamo parlato di luoghi, abbiamo parlato di lingua, abbiamo parlato di letteratura. Si potrebbe parlare di molte altre cose, ad esempio di vestiti, di cibo, di rapporti con le persone, cioè insomma è un mondo composito, quello dell'identità, dentro il quale sembra entrare davvero tutto. E dall'altra parte, però, poi quando ci mettiamo lì e cerchiamo di definire il concetto, ci rendiamo conto che è un concetto piuttosto sfuggente, no? E al punto da venire il sospetto che forse non esista nemmeno davvero questa identità, e cioè che sia fondamentalmente solo una rappresentazione dell'identità, cioè che in sé sfugga a ogni definizione perché fondamentalmente non esiste. E quindi, siccome c'è un bisogno molto forte nell'essere umano di riconoscersi, di veicolare un'immagine di sé, questa identità noi ce la costruiamo, no? E uno dei tanti modi per farlo è la letteratura, naturalmente. Quindi io quando leggo un testo, naturalmente se questo, soprattutto quando questo testo è un testo autobiografico, dichiaratamente o meno autobiografico, ho la sensazione che chi scrive stia raccontando di sé. Ma fondamentalmente non mi interessa neanche più di tanto se dietro quella finzione letteraria che è l'io c'è l'uomo che ha scritto questo libro. Non mi importa più di tanto. E quindi non mi preoccupo di definire o di determinare se lo scrittore ha voluto o non ha voluto rappresentare se stesso. A me interessa che quel libro sia bello, che sia un libro di qualità, che sia scritto bene, che dica qualcosa del mondo in cui vivo, no? Non so quindi rispondere se i presupposti sono quelli che ti ho appena enunciato alla domanda formulata come è stata formulata.
So the concept of identity is very complex. It's very difficult to say which factor build up identity and what is separate from identity. Sometimes we put in identity different things, places, languages, culture, literature, but does identity really exist? It's very difficult to say. I can say from my point of view that the identity is something that people need. So they work out something that make them feel secure. So I want to define myself in a certain way. I build up my identity. I really like to write, to read about autobiographical books. And if a book is really nice, fluent, pleasant, this is what matters at least. I don't want to know if the author is giving a real description of the self, is what he describes his identity. I just want to enjoy the experience. So this is the beauty of literature. So identity is a tool that we use and say what I am, what I want to be, is something that is not the real point of literature.
Right, very well said. There some similarities between the trajectory of both these writers, in the sense that both of them have been engaged in journalism and academia. The extension, the writing has been some kind of an extension of their academic life. So I'm going to ask the both of you about your approach to journalism and literature, and especially in the light of your first novel, Alexandre, your first novel about this boy whose teenage mother leaves him in the care of an elderly widow, and who raises him, and this constant tug of between his past and two kinds of family, his step family and his new reality in Switzerland, and his pulls between one family and one sense of home to another, that is Morocco and Switzerland. And Shahnaz, in your novel, of course, it comes from this deep well of pain and the tragedy of Kashmir. How did you sort of draw on the story around you for your first novel?
Entrambi entrambi voi autori siete stati molto attivi nell'ambito accademico e nel giornalismo, quindi vorremmo sapere l'approccio che avete, essendo comunque degli autori, al giornalismo, tenendo presente il vostro essere attivi a livello letterario, e vorrebbe sapere soprattutto da te come potresti descrivere il passaggio, quello che ti ha provocato questo passaggio tra le due famiglie, quella naturale e quella adottiva, l'essere un po', diciamo, tra virgolette, sballottato tra l'una e l'altra, almeno per un certo periodo di tempo, prima di trovare una tua stabilità.
Non ho capito la relazione tra le due parti della domanda, cioè prima giornalismo e letteratura e poi le due culture.
Sì, sta affondendo le due domande in pratica, sono due domande.
Sono due domande. Ma allora sul giornalismo sarò breve, nel senso che io ho lavorato poco come giornalista, l'ho fatto soprattutto tra gli ultimi anni universitari e l'inizio della mia attività da insegnante, ben consapevole però che non era la strada che volevo prendere, nel senso che ho avuto l'opportunità di iniziare un percorso all'interno della televisione, della radio, soprattutto della Svizzera italiana, ho lavorato lì come redattore, ma il linguaggio del giornalismo è un linguaggio col quale faccio un po' fatica a muovermi, nel senso che ovviamente non è lo stesso non hai la stessa libertà di quando scrivi un romanzo, devi rispettare dei codici che a me stavano stretti, così come stava molto stretta la tempistica, cioè quando scrivi per un giornale o per una radio devi produrre dei pezzi, sono proprio dei prodotti in breve tempo, con certe caratteristiche, devono essere molto accessibili al pubblico, devono essere nella linea editoriale, insomma devi fare servizio pubblico, no? E ci sono delle regole che devi rispettare. L'attività letteraria non dico che sia l'opposto di questo, ma è proprio un altro mondo, per cui ho fatto del mio meglio, ma ben consapevole che non era quello il linguaggio che volevo per me. Mentre per quanto riguarda il mio essere sballottato fra le due culture, è ciò che fondamentalmente mi ha spinto a scrivere quello che per oggi è l'unico libro che ho scritto. È stato quello il motore decisivo. Io, sin da quando ho memoria di esistere, mi sono spessissimo sentito rivolgere la domanda: ti senti più svizzero, ti senti più marocchino? No? E quindi negli anni ho costruito una sorta di, come dire, quasi di obbligo morale nel pensare di dover scegliere, no, tra queste due appartenenze. Ho avuto proprio bisogno di scrivere il libro per rendermi conto che in realtà non dovevo scegliere, cioè che il problema stava nella domanda. E quindi per tutta l'adolescenza e per tutta l'infanzia, per buona parte dell'adolescenza, io mi sono sentito, come dire, principalmente parte della realtà svizzera nella quale sono cresciuto, ma poi questa appartenenza l'ho messa in discussione, cioè quando sono tornato a vivere con mia madre nella quotidianità della sua vita, che era fatta di divani arabi, di tende arabe, di cibo arabo, di lingua araba, insomma un piccolo Marocco costruito a Lugano, ecco che questo mi ha costretto a fare i conti, no, col mio paese di origine, e tutte quelle certezze identitarie che avevo maturato da bambino si sono sgretolate veramente in poco tempo. E il passo successivo è stato proprio quello di trovare un equilibrio che non è dire io sono metà e metà. L'identità, ammesso che esista, e io ho sempre più dubbi che esista, comunque è una. Se c'è, è una. Non si può dividere in compartimenti, non si può dividere in percentuali. Oggi si cerca di uscire da questa difficoltà definitoria parlando di identità fluide, ma anche questa mi sembra una soluzione insoddisfacente, perché se è fluida, cioè se è come un fiume che scorre e cambia continuamente, non è un'identità, voglio dire, che se continua a cambiare, di che cosa stiamo parlando, no? Insomma, alla fine io ho avuto bisogno di scrivere questo libro per capire che più scomponi l'identità, più vedi quanto è complessa, quanto è multiforme, quanto è mutevole, più ti rendi conto che stai parlando di una cosa che non ha una consistenza vera e propria. e forse l'equilibrio vero sta nel accettare questa incertezza.
In terms of his career as a journalist, he worked as a journalist for a few years before becoming a professor of Italian language and literature. So he cannot really say much about the influence of journalistic language on his books. You can say that journalism is giving us a certain language register, which is very rigid. There are a lot of rules, deadline, so there is less creativity in journalism. And this is exactly what he didn't like about it. So he doesn't have any regret about his previous career in journalism. He enjoyed much more working as an author, writing freely. What he wants. Going back to his shifting from a family, the adoptive family, to going back living with his mom. He can say that this is exactly the starting point of his book. So many people looking at him always ask where you come from, how you define yourself. You are Swiss, you are Italian, you are Arabic. It was always forced in a way to choose between being Swiss or between being Arabic. And he could not identify himself either in one or in another category. So everything looked very strict and still. There were two boxes where he couldn't fit. So he decided to write just to work within himself about the concept of identity. Who am I? So writing means discovering. He thinks that identity is something which means balance between different components that mix up together to create something new. So it's not that I'm more Swiss and less Arabic or vice versa. I am what I am because different influence I had from different places, experience, culture, languages, heritage. It doesn't agree on the fact that identity is a fluid concept, because fluid means something is changing constantly. So if it's changing constantly, it doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, why we keep talking about identity? Because we need identity to define ourselves, but who we are just a mix of things. And we don't need to keep justifying ourselves, describing us, because people want to hear from us particular answer. That's why this question is very complex. I hope that I could answer what you ask.
I don't think we can hear you now.
Hi. Yeah. So thank you, Manuela. So I was saying it's very fascinating, this view of Alexandre about identity and how it's kind of very fluid, and especially in the times that we live in, when there's so much of exchange happening at various levels between cultures, between individuals, and something which is something which is fluid, of course, gives you a sense of a chimerical object, something that perhaps does not exist. Shahnaz, if you could tell us about about this as well as your approach to journalism and literature, and something about your first novel, The Half Mother, and how that sort of where that is coming from.
Yeah, I really agree with what Alexandre talked about identity, and I also believe that identity is not that fluid a concept that the postmodern discourse is trying to make it, because then we cease to be what we could be, even not only what we are. So because we come from somewhere and we go to somewhere, so it is like really a balance. But the overbalance is stepping into a domain where the self becomes the other, and then the self ceases to be the self it was. So and he spoke I just he partook a good portion of the response to your question already, in terms of how literature is restricted, sorry, how journalism is restricted, in terms of when you discover yourself, you discover that you can write and describe. You can use the literary device, the figurative language, your consciousness, your experience. You can learn the craft and use it in terms of expressing yourself, whatever you have, whatever you have been going through, whatever you see around yourself. At the same time, there are certain places, of course, in the world that allow you to describe yourself literarily in terms of journalism, but not always. Like, for example, the scene of journalism in Kashmir is mostly until just 5, 6, 7 years back, before many young journalists and even some senior ones started stepping into the domain of narrative journalism, narrativizing the whole reportage that we already had in Kashmir. So it was journalism in Kashmir, and I think generally, when we come to use the term, is actually a very harshly reductive term we use, because it reduces a life story into a number. It just gives you a statistic, 1 killed, 3 injured, 4 wounded, and whatever, and that's gone. In 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, you give the what, where, who, how, maybe why also somewhere, and then it's you. But it looks like we normalize this statistical understanding of life in a place as contentious and as troubled as Kashmir. So I think narrative journalism, as Alexandre said, that it frees us, and since we have these literary devices, we have these tools, we express this one number: who got killed, why, who was he, what is his life story. So when you are conscious and sensitive about these things, you will never restrict yourself to the journalism of reportage, but you would go beyond that, and you would go into narrating, all that you see around yourself. And and also literature is something. Literature itself is a sort of a resistance to the conventional life that we live in the world. And I think that is the philosophy of creativity, that the creative self manifests itself through creativity, and breaks those bonds of conventional life, and tells you that this thing should be this, or at least if it is not this, but it should be understood in this way, and still you are free to make any meaning out of that. The reader is free, as they say. The writer is dead already after once it's published. So literature gives you a free space of running around and expressing yourself and the characters that you need to really, and it's somehow it is strangely and beautifully a space where you mostly do not say anything but the truth, because truth is not the episteme, that some knowledge, some information that you need to write in journalism and a news report. But truth is an experience, a feeling that you feel and express, that this is what I feel. It's honestly and conscientiously, but not merely a fact, because facts can be manufactured as they are. Now we have a counter narratives creating counter publics in the world, and then, that leads to, injustice. So literature gives us a space to break these hard shells of restricted reportage and come out with narratives and, of human beings, to express them, as freely as you want to, and then leave it to the readers to judge for themselves that what you want to say. So this is something I understand, I have come to understand. So the same goes for my, first book, that, a lot of statistics that 8,000 people disappeared, this number of people killed. But now, what does it mean to be disappeared? And what does it mean to have somebody disappeared from your family, from a space which you were sharing with a loved one? So what goes on? So that becomes a representative of the cluster of those stories that always is being crunched to certain numbers, which even it doesn't take even 8 seconds to say 8,000 people. So that is how that is what prompted me, to use the literary device, to use the literary fiction in order to tell a story, to expand this, this fact of, tragedy that is disappearance.
Right, absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that literature allows you to do, to sort of go beyond the cold statistics and humanize your story, to give a very, very a perspective that deals with the human condition and the remorse, the trauma, all that comes into the picture. I wanted to ask, we have almost, it's been nearly 1.5 hours, so we should be wrapping now. Just a couple of more questions. And Alexandre, I wanted to ask you about your first novel, The Key in the Mill. The central concern of the novel, which from my reading, what I gathered was that it seems to have this strong, emphasis on memory and how it's very crucial to, as it is to a lot of literature of our times, that perhaps memory is something where all of us belong to. That it's a place, after all, where we live.
Vorremmo parlare del tuo primo libro e dell'enfasi che metti sulla memoria, sui ricordi. Parli della memoria come se si trattasse di un luogo. Ci puoi dire di più al riguardo?
Sì, tutto il libro è costruito mettendo in fila i ricordi del narratore, che è anche il protagonista. Ricordi che naturalmente in buona parte corrispondono alla verità autobiografica di chi scrive, ma che non coincidono al 100% con la verità biografica. Quello che di cui mi sono reso conto scrivendo in profondità è che la memoria fondamentalmente è un'interpretazione del passato, no? Quindi anche semplicemente nella scelta, no, di questi ricordi che io ho messo in fila, avevo in mente un progetto che era innanzitutto un progetto letterario, no? Non ho ripescato dalla memoria tutto ciò che ricordavo, come immagino si faccia, no, in un'autobiografia. No. Ho pescato ciò che era funzionale al messaggio che io avevo in testa, che mi si è chiarito strada facendo, ma che una volta che si è chiarito poi mi ha aiutato molto nell'organizzazione del materiale. No. Allora, tutti i frammenti che compongono il libro, in un modo o nell'altro, hanno a che fare col tema dell'identità. No? Anche quelli che apparentemente sembrerebbero avere poco a che fare con l'identità, ma ripensando così al mio trascorso e alle mie difficoltà proprio di trovare un equilibrio identitario, mi sono reso conto che tutti i momenti essenziali, no, della mia infanzia e della mia adolescenza in un modo o nell'altro si legavano, no, a questo tema. Posso fare qualche esempio molto semplice, no, così che possano capire anche coloro che non hanno letto il libro. Mi sono ricordato, ad esempio, scrivendo il libro, che mi fu assegnato per una recita scolastica la parte di Baldassarre, uno dei tre re magi. Non so se in India abbiano presente, no, non penso. Vabbè. Comunque, i tre re magi, di questi tre re magi, uno è di colore, no? Ha la pelle scura. E io che vivevo in questo piccolo paese del Ticino, nel quale ero l'unica persona di colore, non mi ero reso conto che avessero scelto me per quella ragione, no? Quindi ero molto orgoglioso della parte che mi avevano assegnato e poi ripensandoci da adulto ho dato senso, no, a questo momento. Quindi ho capito, mi hanno scelto per quella ragione, naturalmente ci ho riso sopra perché è una cosa tutto sommato buffa, no? E mi sono reso conto che aveva come dire, un suo spazio nella mia costruzione identitaria, perché mi rifletteva qualcosa del modo in cui gli altri mi guardavano, no? Allora io lì in questa comunità di paese ero l'unico, diciamo, di colore, ero il negretto, no, del paese, e anche se mi sentivo perfettamente integrato in questo luogo, comunque questo marchio me lo dovevo portare dietro, no? Un marchio che poi è diventato più esplicito, e faccio un secondo e ultimo esempio, nel momento in cui mia madre ha deciso di avvicinarmi alla cultura del mio paese di origine. E uno dei momenti che è depositato in maniera più nitida nella mia memoria è il giorno in cui il prete è entrato nell'aula scolastica e mi ha accompagnato fuori perché mia madre aveva deciso che non avrei più dovuto seguire l'ora di religione perché sarei dovuto diventare un musulmano, no? Quindi ho passato i primi 10 anni della mia vita, se vogliamo, da cristiano che va a messa, che conosce le preghiere, eccetera, eccetera, e improvvisamente mia madre ha deciso che mi sarei dovuto avvicinare all'Islam. E questo è uno dei tanti elementi di disequilibrio e di frattura che si è creata innanzitutto tra me e mia madre, poi anche rispetto al mio paese di origine. Forse l'ultima cosa che posso dire è che il titolo del libro, che non vorrei spiegare al 100%, però ha proprio a che fare con la memoria e con il ricordo, perché la scena che dà titolo al libro è l'unica che io non ricordo e che mi è stata raccontata, no? Per tanti anni, in occasione di molte cene, pranzi di famiglia, mi veniva raccontata una storia, no? Le storie di famiglia che ci sono in ogni famiglia, no? E che ha a che fare proprio con una chiave e con il latte, e che riletta questa storia a distanza, mi sembrava che desse la giusta chiave di entrata per tutto il libro.
Okay. So there are several memories which he decided to collect, organize, and put in his book. Of course, this is an autobiography, so the memory he described are his memory, but they are not 100% untouched. They are memories that have been polished to be put in a book. So you cannot say that these are 100% real memory. There is always the intervention of the author to make these memories more appealing for the literary world. Of course, he had to select what to be put in his book and what not, but all these memory deal with the concept of identity. That's why for him memory means a place, because it's a place where he can build up his identity, slowly collecting things, recalling events. So I want to say that there are two memories, two episodes that are worth telling to people. First of all, when he was going to school, there was a play during Christmas time. So there was a play where there are three kings accompanying Jesus Christ, bringing Jesus Christ some gift. These are called in Italian re magi. One of them is black, his complexion is a little dark. So in the school has been decided that he had to play the role of Baldassarre, that is this black king. He was very excited at the beginning. He was it was for him an honor. Then slowly he realized the reason why he had to play this black guy, because people were seeing in him someone different because of the color of skin. So this episode is also described in his book. Secondly, when he was going to school, his mom decided that he had not to follow the hour of religion because they teach religion in school, and he understood why, because his mom decided that he had to become a Muslim, so he had to become familiar with Islam. So he stopped attending this class at school. And for him, this created a clash with his mom, because she was deciding on what he had to become. So at that time he was young, so he could not really change the things. Also, the title of the book refers to a memory of him, the key in the milk. And this memory is the only one he doesn't really recall. So this memory is a story which has been told to him by other people, but is not fixed in his mind. So it's very interesting, because the book is a sequence of memory he chose and he organized, but this specific one, which gave the title to the book, just flew away, and some other people told him the story.
Okay, great. So I want to go across to Shahnaz now and ask him about this the act of writing, and do you sort of see it as an act of resistance, as an act of revenge against the injustice, or against violence? One of the things that strikes me about your writing, Shahnaz, is that how deeply invested it is in philosophy and in philosophical ideas, in a sense that it's written to sort of provoke and not entertain. So how do you see your enterprise as a writer, and what does writing mean to you, especially in the context of where you come from?
It's a very complicated. It's an easy question to ask, but it's a very difficult, question to answer, because at one point, I think in the beginning, when there is this uncertainty about actualizing yourself as a writer, when you are not sure that whether you fail or you are successful in terms of getting published and people reading and reflecting upon it back to you. You are full of passion. You are a little childish. You're also in haste a little, of course, and you are also excited, and you're also a bit rough. But I think after this experience is, lived, you sit back, for your next project, and you think that is it really something that, you were expecting to happen, and has it happened that way? Of course not. I think, though, I can now understand, there's no comparison, first of all, but I can understand the gesture when Kafka tells his friend Max Brod that, this will that, all of his writings should be burnt, soon after he is gone. But Max Brod, fortunately for us and unfortunately for Kafka, did not keep the promise. Because, whenever I accidentally even, hold my first book in my hand, I do not open it because I fear that I might open a page and read it and realize that I could have done it much, much better than I have done. So this, though I at the same time realized that of course it had to be this way at that point of time. So no matter, never mind. But still, one revises oneself, one sits back, but it all comes to what I was earlier talking about, semantics. Like, what does it mean to say what you are saying? Would you become a partner in crime to this fact of people writing books and not able to make any difference in somebody's life? I think we should, of course, everybody is free to write whatever they want to write, but I think essentially writing, because life is a short time, we do not have a lot of time to always be entertained. Of course, literature methodologically is entertainment itself, but we should really cherish the moments. We should really utilize that, the hours we devote to reading. So I don't think a book should exist that does not transform you to an extent that you emerge a different person across the last page of the book. However, that is able to do it. So I think it's all to do with meaning making. I am at, I have not written much. It is just always when I think of my writing and these two small books, I think it's like a trial. I think, there are things that, of course, Dostoevsky once said that there is nothing that people have not written about and that people don't know about, but, you say it in your own way, but still that, whenever there is this, you're grounded between these two stones of compulsions. One stone is you feel that writing is something you are burdened with a responsibility and you have to unburden yourself somehow. And if you do not do that, it will continue to frustrate you. It will reflect in your personality. But at the same time, there are occasions I do not want to write. I don't feel, I would really like to read, but I do not feel to write. And it is to a level, that, whenever I hold a book, first 3, 4, 5 pages, I get easily bored because it doesn't engage me in terms of, that sort of inclusivity that some masters have, really mastered. And I was lucky enough to find a few of them. I don't know if there are more that exist in the world. Like, for example, when you write a sentence and it is inclusive of philosophy, craft, poetry, at the same time, description of a scene, that is happening, very ordinary thing, all put together. I think if one writes only one book ever in his or her whole lifetime, but is able to be inclusive in this term, I think Elena Ferrante, for example, Days of Abandonment. These are a few books that I read again and again. Anybody hands me, any new book, however, those overrated blurbs and praise, but I personally, however small a reader I am, I do not like to harp on something, mind blowing because New York Times is reviewing it, top bestseller and all. But I think there are very few books that have really transformed me in terms of this question that why should one write unless you have something really meaningful to say. Whether that is going to change somebody or not, that's not your responsibility. But the important thing is that this question before you start writing that. I think it's you have to balance it. Like one should not also die thinking that, okay, I have to write such a book that has all these things and waiting to write that book one dies. That is also not good, but one should not also be in a haste to do it. That's what the advice I give all these youngsters in Kashmir.
Alexandre, one last question to you about the cultural exchange, and since we are talking about diversity and having a dialogue about diversity, a lot of this cultural exchange, of course, is to do with sports, culture, and cuisine. In India, Switzerland is all about cheese and wine and and everything beautiful, everything fascinating. Some of the cultural figures, and that's a question that I'll also come to Shahnaz too. And this is with this we'll wrap. Some of the cultural figures that you think are bridging the gap between two countries, even though there is no gap, but you're bringing the two countries and cultures together. So first Alexandre can say, and then Shahnaz can.
Per gli indiani la Svizzera ha sempre rappresentato un luogo magico perché le Alpi svizzere vengono dipinte nei film di Bollywood, fanno da sfondo alle storie d'amore più emozionanti sullo schermo, poi c'è il formaggio, il cioccolato, i vini, gli orologi, tutto ciò che ha a che fare con il lusso. Vorrebbe sapere se c'è qualche personaggio, qualche figura con cui diciamo ti identifichi o a cui ti ispiri, che faccia parte proprio della Svizzera o che sia attivo in Svizzera e che anche scrivi in altre lingue.
Così su due piedi, personaggi svizzeri nei quali mi identifico, onestamente direi di no. Però siccome si è parlato di queste immagini, no, che l'indiano ha della Svizzera, magari posso rovesciare, mi permetto di rovesciare la domanda e quindi di rispondere a qualcos'altro, no? Io quando penso all'India, no, da grande appassionato di tennis e vista anche la natura dell'incontro di oggi che vuole far dialogare Svizzera e India, non posso non pensare a un doppio misto storico che vide schierati un tennista indiano che io ricordo con grande ammirazione, non so se lo pronuncerò correttamente, si chiama Paes, che giocò in coppia con Martina Hingis, che è una delle più grandi tenniste svizzere, un talento infinito, no? Quindi questo incontro Svizzera-India mi piace ricordarlo con questa coppia formidabile, e quando io penso all'India penso a Paes, al talento enorme che aveva questo giocatore, che ha vinto anche diversi titoli importanti. E poi penso anche a una cosa che sento molto, molto familiare, che è, visto che ne ho accennato precedentemente, alla cucina indiana. Io amo la cucina indiana, naturalmente non sono mai stato in India e quindi non so esattamente, come dire, quanto sia ricco il patrimonio gastronomico indiano, però penso che se io entrassi in un ristorante indiano potrei puntare a caso il dito sulla carta e ordinerei qualcosa di squisito in ogni modo.
Is very glad to hear that you have a fascination for Swiss in terms of nature, chocolate, wine, all the luxury products that come from there. He doesn't really identify himself or get inspired by any particular, figure in India, in Switzerland, but he wants to reverse the question and he wants to talk about his fascination for India. So he never been to India so far, but since we are having a sort of, meeting between the two cultures here, he wants to recall a tennis match. He's very fond of tennis between Martina Hingis and a tennis player from India. I don't know if I pronounce his name correctly, Paes. He won some award also for the way he played. So for him, India and Switzerland always met and interact in terms of exchange. giving each other something meaningful, and is very passionate about Indian food. So he's pretty sure that if it happened for him to travel to India and to visit an Indian restaurant, whatever he's going to choose from the menu, it will be of his taste.
Thank you, Manila. Shahnaz, just a quick in a line or two about some of the cultural ambassadors from India who you think are a bridge between the East and the West, so to speak, and especially in context of Switzerland.
I think I cannot think, beyond Pro Helvetia, India team. I think they have a very superb, intelligent team and very passionate about cultural exchange and introducing artists and writers. And I was also one of the lucky persons who traveled to Switzerland, and I was a resident writer there for almost 2 months. And I think the team that I know currently, all of them are very, very, experienced in terms of what Switzerland art and culture is all about, more than anyone else in India. And not only that, but beyond that as well. So I think I cannot think, more than them. So I think that is what
So with that, we wrap the session. Thank you so much, Alexandre, Manuela, Shahnaz, for this wonderful conversation. Thank you, audience, and thank you, Belong and Pro Helvetia, for giving us a chance to have this lovely conversation about diversity.